is our youth Advent service. We do a service like this every year, and it's been a blessing this year to have some of our youth leading the service. So it's been a good service. Today, I realised this after I finished writing this sermon, that I feel like I end up revealing something about myself every time I preach. And so the reveal today is actually that one of my not-so-secret loves is to collect rocks. I love collecting rocks. It might not be a massive surprise if you know that I spend a good chunk of my time as a geography teacher, or if you've seen my desk, you might have noticed it's covered in rocks. But as I've been getting into rock collecting in the last couple of years, I've discovered that there is quite a vibrant community behind rocks. A few months ago, a colleague took me to a gem show down in the suburbs, and I was really blown away by the variety of rocks on display, but also the variety of people on display as well at that rock show. And the thing that stood out to me the most when I was at this rock show was the value that people placed on geodes. If you ask me what the coolest sort of rock to collect would be, I might have told you a chunk of meteorite, maybe something that was formed in a volcanic eruption, or some sort of other gemstone that only formed under particular conditions, those sort of things. But at the gem show, so often the most popular tables were the ones that were filled with unopened geodes. And if for those that might not know, a geode is essentially this sort of spherical, fairly ordinary looking rock that when cracked open contains a formation of gemstones. But from the outside, it looks completely ordinary. What's interesting about geodes, I think, the popularity really lies in the mystery behind them. You're essentially buying what's an ordinary rock, looks like an ordinary rock, with the promise that there's something special inside of it. I found this week that there's a whole genre of videos online you can find where people will go out and go geode hunting. They'll search for these rocks and then have a big moment of reveal on camera where they'll crack them open. Sometimes it'll be something cool, sometimes it'll be a bit more disappointing. But really it's that anticipation, the moment of breaking it open, the revelation of what's inside. It's gathered quite a following. We just saw a skit about an innkeeper who looked at an ordinary manger and saw some dollar signs. He thought that he'd found his own kind of geode in a way, something that was ordinary that he could transform into something valuable. But really he was looking for value in the wrong sorts of places, and his wife was getting excited about the business potential, new wallpaper, media coverage, custom cloaks. They were ready to transform the manger into something quite a tourist attraction. But in doing so, really they missed the real treasure, which is the truth that God has chosen this ordinary manger as the first throne for his Son on earth. And in Paul's letter to the Corinthian church that we heard from today, Paul writes about having treasure in jars of clay, about how God places his most precious gifts in the most unexpected containers. And so today I want to explore two different ways that we can miss the real treasure by focusing on the wrong kind of value, and maybe how we can see things through the eyes of those two shepherds instead. So the innkeeper and his wife, they're getting excited about how they could package and present the manger. We can clean up the dump, new wallpaper, they can clean it up, make it nice, bring in nice little animals to form an attraction. They weren't the first, and they certainly wouldn't be the last, to fall into something I was thinking of this week as sort of like a mentality of unboxing. And what do I mean by unboxing, an unboxing mentality? It's our obsession with presentation and reveal. There's a whole nother lot of things today that revolve around the idea of people unwrapping things. If you've bought a new phone at all in the last the last 5 years or so, you might have noticed that the process of getting your phone out of the box, you sort of slide it up and you tear the little thing off and you pull it out of the packaging and you peel the plastic off, and it's all very satisfying and very nice. And you can find that in all sorts of places, not just phones. And really, the moment of reveal has become more significant than the product itself. I discovered this week that Apple, with their phones, actually have patents on their box design. So you think their product is a phone, sure, but perhaps their product is also the box, if that's what they're patenting. In 2 Corinthians, Paul was writing to a church in Corinth, which was a wealthy city, a sophisticated city, where this same kind of presentation and spectacle mattered enormously. The Corinthians had their own sort of version of unboxing culture. Their markets would have been full of ornate vessels, jewelled boxes, metal strong boxes that were engraved on. You might think about what it would have been like to walk into someone's home in Corinth. You'd likely see their most precious possessions displayed in the finest containers they could afford. Precious oils in decorated ceramic, jewellery and coins in strong boxes. The reveal, the presentation, the packaging was all part of demonstrating value. And really, we're not all that different today than the Corinthians, judging books by covers or wine by its bottle, gifts by the wrapping. Things need to be decorated with flourish, need to be photographed for social media, presented as an experience. But Paul in 2 Corinthians turns this around on its head. And he suggests that God has not only made use of the ordinary containers that he has, but that God has deliberately chosen ordinary containers to do his work, not in spite of their ordinariness, but because of it. The contrast between containers and contents isn't an accident, it's the point. He writes, "We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us." The manger itself was perhaps the most humble container imaginable for a king. No dramatic reveal for those shepherds going in, no special lighting, no curated experience. It was a feeding trough for animals, was likely created out of wood, dusty, well used, filled with hay. And the innkeeper in our skit saw this as a problem to be fixed, something to be cleaned up, something to be decorated, and something to be marketed. But what if this ordinariness was part of God's design? When people encounter real treasure, talent, power, flowing through polished, perfect containers, it's easy to get distracted by the packaging. It's easy to get distracted by the speaker's eloquence rather than the message that they're sharing, or to be impressed by the architecture of a church rather than its ministry, to be focused on the production value of an experience rather than the power of God at work in it. It's almost like our sort of obsession with those sort of experiences can blind us to the gift itself. And the innkeeper and his wife missed this truth entirely. In their excitement about marketing, tourist attractions, they nearly overlooked the extraordinary reality that God had chosen their stable, their ordinary manger, as the birthplace of the Messiah. They saw a business opportunity where God had placed a miracle, were planning marketing strategies when they should have been witnessing mystery. Paul writes in our passage that we are hard-pressed on every side but not crushed, perplexed but not in despair, persecuted but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed. And this is poetic language that Paul's using, but it's not just poetic language. He really is describing what happens when we see beyond the ordinary to recognise God's treasure. The shepherds didn't come to the manger because it was beautifully decorated or well marketed. They came because the angels had proclaimed something extraordinary, that God had chosen this ordinary place for his extraordinary purpose. It's sort of like that moment in a theatre when the house lights dim and a spotlight illumines a single actor on stage. Everything else fades to black, and suddenly all the attention is focused on this one point of light. And this is what was happening in the stable. The shepherds weren't seeing a tourist attraction, they saw God's presence illumining something else. And this is what Paul tells us when he says later that we carry around in our bodies the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed. It's an image that feels like a bit of a paradox at first. Our limitations, our ordinariness, our brokenness are the exact things that God uses to reveal his presence. The stable wasn't valuable because it could generate the most income for the innkeepers. It was valuable because God chose to use it as the setting for the greatest gift the world has ever received. And this is why Paul can write with such confidence about our weakness being an asset rather than a liability. He understands that our ordinariness isn't an obstacle to be overcome, but it's a feature of God's design. And Paul understood this better than anyone. His own weaknesses, his own struggles had been an integral part of his own story. The more ordinary the container, the more extraordinary the treasure appears. Like the innkeeper, sometimes we start by looking for value in the wrong places, focusing on the packaging, the presentation, the potential for profit. It's easy to get caught up in that desire to make things shinier, more impressive, more marketable. But just as the shepherd helped the innkeeper see beyond that commercial potential of the manger to its true significance, Paul invites us to see beyond our own ordinariness to recognise God's treasure in us. The value that wasn't just in the crystals inside the geodes, it's the same as the contrast between the ordinary exterior and our extraordinary interior. The value is in the moment of revelation, when what is hidden becomes visible. God's pattern is clear. He consistently chooses to place his greatest treasures in ordinary containers to shine his brightest lights through our darkest moments. The shepherd in our skit reminded us that Christ will be with us all, leading us wherever we are, and this is at the heart of Paul's message about treasure in clay jars. The question reassuringly, isn't whether or not we are worthy containers, because we know that we're not. The question isn't about whether we're strong enough, because we know that we're not. The question is whether or not we're willing to let God use our ordinariness, our struggles, our weakness, as the very things that make his power visible to others. So as we carry on through this Advent season, maybe it's worth thinking about, what are we trying to package? What are we trying to market? What are we trying to perfect in ourselves? Because at different times, we might need to stop trying to dress up the manger and simply appreciate the treasure that it holds.